What is up, PG? Bitchy boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander, and I am back for a pretty fun series, to be honest. I watched a video recently from Dan from the Commander Sphere, talking about how every year he takes apart all of his decks and rebuilds them, and kind of decides, what he wants to rebuild and what not, and catalogs his collection and that kind of thing. And I honestly, I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that was a pretty cool way to approach kind of making sure you're policing, what you're actually playing and, what you're actually actively paying attention to. And I think if I had more actual main decks built, I think I would probably manage that approach. I think it would be a better approach to how I have kind of done things. But for me, I do a lot of testing, and there's been a lot of decks that I've kind of passed up in the past because as much as I've liked them, they just haven't had X or haven't had Y, and I just wasn't all in on them. But I decided I would take the concept of Dan's video to heart and actively re-brew all of my decks. I know that sounds like an absolutely crazy notion, and it is a crazy notion. So we're going to start that series today, Millzy Revisits. This is going to be me rebrewing all of my decks, the main decks first, and then we'll go through the decks that I'm actively testing at the moment, the ones that I want to build. I have 5 main decks at the moment, and then I have 5 that are almost ready to build, and those that we're going to talk about in the series next. And then we're going to go from there about talking about the other decks. I pulled every single deck in my main box, every single deck in my test box apart. I did a lot of thinking about whether or not it's something I wanted to play for the long term and something I really wanted to test. I'll still do what I normally do, which is throw random things together and test them because I have the liberty to do that. But what better deck to start with first than Goreclaw? Goreclaw is the second deck that I ever built. The first we will see very late on in this series. I'm actually going to bring it back. It's a deck that I'm very excited to bring back. But Goreclaw Terror of Kel Sisma is a mono-green stompy list that revolves around Goreclaw and her 2 abilities. The first being that creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. And then whenever Goreclaw Terror of Kel Sisma attacks, each creature you control power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample until the end of turn. So 2 abilities. 1, creatures become cheaper. 2, whenever we attack, we get trample. So what I would like to do with this series is, I believe for all 5 of my main decks, I did have deck text posted at one point. So there should be an old kind of then versus now thing that we get to see. But what I want to do is just go kind of through the deck. I'm going to start with the top at Moxfield and just kind of go to the bottom. I'll make sure that there's chapters here so you guys can go through, and if you want to look at any particular section, we talk about, what changed and that kind of thing. You can do that. But I just want to talk about what's different with the deck, maybe what's the same, how my mindset changed on different things, and the lessons I've learned playing the deck. Because it's easy just to give you a deck tech with, hey, X card is good. But I kind of want to talk about a little bit also of why I enjoy the deck, how the cards work, and then for the new cards I'm adding in, what I hope they do kind of in the lineup of the deck. So we'll start with the Planeswalkers. These are the same 2 Planeswalkers I've played for a predominant amount of the deck. First is Nissa, who shakes the world. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, you add an additional green, +1 untaps a non-creature land, makes it a 3/3 elemental. -8, you can go, it says lands you control are indestructible. Then you can search your library for any other number of forest cards and put them on the battlefield tabs. You can pretty much just go get every single forest out of your library and put it on the battlefield. Have yet to -8 Nissa, because generally people know what Nissa does, do try to kill her before she can hit -8. Who don't know what she does will grab her card, read it, and go, yeah, we need to kill that Planeswalker. And rightfully we'll kill Nissa before, or destroy Nissa before she gets -8. And that's okay. I think the added mana doubling with Nissa on those forests gets you all the value you need it to, and you just necessarily don't need it to ultimate. The second is Vivien, Monsters Advocate. This is one of my favorite Planeswalkers in this deck because it enables some fun combos. You can look at the top card of your library at any time. You can cast creatures from the top of your library. This is great because it kind of extends your hand, allows you to see more from the top of your deck. It says +1, create a 3/3 beast, and you get your choice of Vigilance, Reach, or Trample. I really like this because you can take the Reach if you're playing against a lot of flying decks. You can take the Vigilance if you want to have like a spare attacker or something like that, and you could take the Trample if you really want to. But the good part about this deck is I have so many Trample enablers that you don't really need to take the Trample. More often than not, you're going to take Reach because you want to have a blocker. And the -2 is the big ability. Whenever you cast your next creature spell this turn, search your library for a creature with less CMC, or that would say less mana value now. Put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. The biggest combo in this deck for Vivien is these two right here, Ghalta and Throsta. So Ghalta is 10 green, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. Very seldom in this deck do you cast Ghalta for anything more than just double green. And then Throsta says, this spell costs 3 less for each other spell you've cast this turn. And again, very seldom do you cast Throsta for anything other than double green. Well, for the purpose of Vivien, both of these two spells on the stack have a mana value of 12, even though you're only paying 2 green mana to cast them. So the cool part about Vivien's ability is that we can then go get any other creature in our deck, because these are the two most expensive creatures in our deck. We can go get them for free. Now, the biggest target here, I'll be honest, the biggest target's Craterhoof. That's the choice you want. It's going to come down, pump your board, and let's get going. But there's not actually, I mean, every other target in the deck's pretty good. I've done Gnawbone a few times in the deck. I've done Vorinclex, Thunderfoot Baloth to pump the board. And I've done the old Vorinclex, which has shown up in the, I'm not sure why it's showing up in the Phyrexian art there, but I've even gone for the old Vorinclex as well. But most of the time, you're going for Craterhoof. Now, the creature that you're getting is not being cast, so we can't go get Apex Devastator because it doesn't actually get cast. So we don't want to do that. You want to go get something that is just going to come in and make good abilities. I've also sometimes gone and got Eternal Ronus because that just doubles everything's power and gives them vigilance, and then you take that big swing into the sun and knock your opponents down a little bit. So that's why Vivien's really good, and I think she fits a great role in the deck. Especially, she's not a bad play. If you can't get Goreclaw down on turn 4, but you can get her down, she's not a bad play because you put a body on the board, and then you kind of prep yourself for the next turn. And even if you have to kind of waste a -2 to get Goreclaw out, you can go then get anything with less than 4, which is still a bunch of creatures. And as we're going to talk about, a lot of really important creatures as well. So that's not even that bad. We'll move on to the creatures. The creatures have changed slightly since the last time I built the deck. And I think a lot of it is the addition and the release of 3 creatures specifically. The first is Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia, that came out in Brothers War. This is a 3 mana dork, really. Add 2 mana of any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creature or creature cards. And then whenever you cast a spell with power 5 or greater, put a counter on it and untap it. I think this is really cool in this deck because it taps for 2, which is great. That's really helpful. It taps for 2 green mana, which is great because that's what we want anyway. But if we can cast 1 or 2 creatures with this down, putting those counters is going to get Gwenna above 4 power, and then it's going to get charged up whenever we make these big attacks, and it becomes a big attacker. The problem that I've noticed sometimes with the mana dorks is Whisper of the Wilds, Elysian Carolid, and Llanowar Elves, who are my other little mana dorks down at the bottom, don't generally tend to get buffed up by anything other than a Thunderfoot Baloth or an effect like Craterhoof or that kind of thing when those come in. So a lot of times they don't get this kind of semi-ferocious bonus off of Goreclaw and the ability to swing. What I like about Gwenna is it's going to start getting +1/+1 counters, and it's going to buff her up. Now buff them up. The other really cool part here is it doesn't say we have to use the mana. The bottom ability doesn't say if you used mana from Gwenna. It just says whenever you cast a spell of power 5 or greater. So it's just going to start getting counters as we cast these creatures and work our way up the chain, which I think is really cool. For someone that doesn't know, Whisper of the Wilds and Kerlitid are here for the same reason. They both tap for 1 mana on their own, which is very similar to something like Mana or Elves. But they both have, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, they tap for 2 mana instead. So basically, the later in the game we go, the more mana they tap for. So those are both really good because they come down early and tap for 1 early. But as we get a couple more creatures out, they start tapping for more mana. The second of those new cards is Runati, Behemoth Caller. This came out in Jumpstart 2022. And I'll be honest, this was a lot of the catalyst for me wanting to take a look back at Goreclaw, because I was like, man, Runati and Gwenna both seem really cool. They both seem like they'd fit. Let's see if we can make it work. So the first ability says, whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 5 or greater, so not power like Gwenna, mana value 5 or greater, which is probably over half the creatures are 5 or greater. So there's a good chance that Runati is going to see a lot of these come down. That creature enters the battlefield with X additional +1/+1 counters on it, where X is its mana value -4. So a 5 would come down with 1, 6, 2, and so on. So that's a good amount of our creatures. And it doesn't care about what we paid for them. It cares about what their mana value is. Creatures you control with 3 or more +1/+1 counters on them have haste. And this is really good. And I'll get that. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I'll get that in a second. And then tap for a green mana. So just tap for 1. But this is really good because Dominaria United gave us Defiler of Vigor, which says instead of whenever we cast a green permanent spell, we can pay 2 life instead of one of the green mana pips in the spell. And then whenever we cast a green permanent spell, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Well, this is cool because we now don't need as many haste enablers if we have Runati out, because if we have Defiler of Vigor and Runati out, every new creature comes in, everything else gets counter. New creature comes in, everything else gets counter, and we're probably going to get ourselves to that 3 mana, 3 counters for the haste pretty quickly. So I think Runati is another one of those ones that we don't mind seeing early, even though they only tap for 1. That bonus is going to get really good. And the other, like I said, the best part about Runati is, it doesn't say if you cast a spell with this, creature's mana. It just says whenever you cast a spell at all. So just like Gwenna, I think the cool part here is that it works in our advantage to have it out even when we're not using it to cast the other spells. And then another one in this slot, I believe it was in the list before, but I think Selvala gets even better now. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it has the most power, again, if it has the most power among every other creature, we draw a card, and then one green tap at any mana where that mana is the amount of the highest power among creatures we control. It's going to be massive. I mean, most of the time it's 13 or 14 for Goreclaw. I mean, most of the time it's a lot. And if you dump Craterhoof out, then it's just going to be even higher and continue going. So I like Selvala. If there was any commander that I would change this deck over to, it would be Selvala, because I think she could still keep the deck working about the same way it would now. I would just rather have Goreclaw in the command zone to have that. I would rather have that reduction all of the time as opposed to needing to find it in the deck. And the next one is Yorvo. Yorvo seems kind of cool. For 3 mana, we get a 4/4. We don't get any reduction though, but that's okay. I don't think 3 green mana pips is that bad to begin with. And whenever a green creature enters the battlefield, it automatically gets +1/+1 counter. But then if that creature's power is greater than Yorvo's, it gets another counter. This is great because Yorvo's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And for 3 mana, perfectly fine. I kind of wish it had trample baked onto it, but that's okay. We have plenty of ways in this deck to give it trample, so I'm not worried about it. I believe we had Nylea Keen-Eyed in the deck before. This is the Nylea, the god that makes all of our creatures cost 1 less. But I decided that I think adding Nylea, God of the Hunt, is a good idea. 1, we get the reduction from Goreclaw. It comes down and gives other creatures trample all of the time, which is great. So even if for some reason Goreclaw dies, we're still giving all of our creatures trample. which is just beneficial. And then we do have the pump on it. But the thing I like about Nylea the best is they both turn into basically indestructible creatures who are just going to become hard to deal with. And on Keen-Eyed, we get the ability to look at the top. If it's a creature, we can put it in our hand. This is great if you just have a ton of extra mana and nothing to do with it. You can start kind of trying to get cards, from the top of your deck, and you could it's kind of almost a surveil because you can put them in the graveyard if you want as well. QuestDB was in the last list. Sirach was in the last list. Ulvan was in the last list. Ashaya is one of two creatures of the similar style that came in. So the thing I learned about these star creatures is the creature's star ability is checked in your hand when you cast the spell, when it goes onto the battlefield. So if we have 4 lands, when we go to cast Ashaya, it will actually be reduced down to 3 with Goreclaw. And that's pretty useful because then Ashaya comes down and makes all of our non-token creatures forests, which is going to then allow us to potentially tap for more mana. So that's really good, and I think Ashaya is going to help a lot there because then things like Cyclonic Rift that say bounce all non-land permanents back to your opponent's hands won't affect our creatures because our creatures will be forests, meaning they will technically be lands. And the other one is Greensleeves. Again, very similar, power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, but now we get an added landfall ability that says whenever you put a land under your control, make a 3/3 Badger. So that's just going to add more creatures to our board, and I think it's just going to be another one of those really hard creatures to deal with. We already talked about Defiler of Vigor, which was Dominaria United's one of the bigger pieces added. The second was Silverback Elder. Comes down for 3 green pips if we have Goreclaw out. Whenever you cast a creature spell, destroy target artifact or enchantment. So we get basically a return to nature. Look at the top 5, put a land on the battlefield tapped, put the rest on the bottom. So we get kind of a pseudo ramp spell or gain 4 life. This is really cool. I like to think of Silverback Elder as kind of an aura shards that we get to have. Aura shards is an enchantment that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, destroy target artifact or enchantment. So you may. So I like that. Notice that the destroy target's not a may, but we have 3 options. So if we don't want to destroy target artifact or enchantment, we're just going to pick something else. And the life gains actually, to be honest, not all that bad, to be honest. At the end of the day, it does actually help more than you think it would. Moving on, a lot of the rest of the creatures in this deck are the same. I've had a lot of really good love with Titan of Ministry and Dawnglade Regent, and Old One Eyes put in some decent work already, even though it was pretty recently released. Gnawbone has been putting in work since the card released in this deck, getting added treasures, getting more mana to do what we need to do. Is never a bad thing. But the card that came back in the deck that used to be in the deck was Kamal, Heart of Krosa. Being a combat on your turn, creatures control get +3/+3 and get trample. And then until end of turn, target land becomes a 1/1 with Vigilance, Indestructible, and Haste. It's still a land. Kamal came back in because I realized that in a lot of ways, Kamal can be a second copy of Goreclaw and turning on trample for all of our creatures. It's going to always probably come down for 6 instead of 8 because of Goreclaw's ability. And it has the ability to turn our lands into creatures, which it'll then pump them up to 4 so that Goreclaw would also give them the added bonus when they attack. But the cool part is they get Vigilance, Indestructible, and Haste, so we could still tap them after combat if we wanted to for mana. But I think Kamal is it's a lot of value on one creature, and in a deck like this where we want to get it down, I feel like it's just gonna put in a lot of work for us. Apex Devastator was a more recent add. Cascading 4 times in a deck like this is just going to lead you to a lot of really good creatures. It feels bad when you cascade into Craterhoof off the first cascade, but if you cascade into it off the last cascade, it's one of the best feelings ever because you're probably just going to win the game. And then Throsta puts in a lot of really good work in this deck because it's very cheap. Just like Galta, it's very cheap to put down. Getting into our spells, a lot of the spells have stayed the same. The two biggest additions that came in, we got Awake in the Woods and Brothers War, and I don't see a reason why this shouldn't go in this deck. you add not only more creatures but more lands, and because they're forest dryad land creature tokens, so you get more lands for next turn. And if you have any way to pump those, then there's just more attackers. Awaken the Wood seems really good. It seems good for 2 mana. It seems good for 8 mana. I think this is one of those cards that the more you put into it, the better it gets. And then we put Natural Order back in the deck. I'm surprised I ever took this card out because I think it's a good combo piece. Late in the game, you can sacrifice a Llanowar Elves for a lot of these big boys up at the top. So I really like Natural Order. I think it works really well on the list. And I'm, again, very surprised I ever honestly took it out. Other than that, everything else stayed the same. All of the ramp stayed the same. I very much considered putting Cultivate and Kadama's Reach back in, but I figured with a lot of these guys, these Mana Dorks I've added and Awaken the Woods, which can be kind of better than Cultivate and Kadama's Reach in a lot of ways, depending on how you use it. I think we're good for the moment. If we play the deck more and realize we need a little bit more oomph, I think we go ahead and bring in maybe a Cultivate or a Kadama's Reach and throw it into the mix. But I think for the moment, we're going to be okay. Moving down, the artifacts are exactly the same as... I know they're not. That's right. I put Ronus's Monument back in. Again, this is in that list of cards with Natural Order that I can't believe I ever took out of the deck, because I think Ronus's Monument is exactly what we want. Green creature spells reduced by 1. Whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and tramples for the turn. This card is best on those turns where you're still setting up. You just brought in Goreclaw last turn. You play in a couple new creatures this turn, but they can't attack yet. Give one of the older creatures +2/+2 trample. Give Goreclaw +2/+2 and trample. Get a good swing in. Very good. Emerald Medallion and Nylea Keen-Eyed are all those cards that we want to see early because they're going to reduce our spells even more. Cold Steel Heart is also really good, and I added Arcane Signet in, I think, 1 or 2 revisions ago. Just as other ways to get mana on the early turns as well. And Great Henge, an absolute MVP of the deck. It's been in here for a very long time. The enchantments in the deck haven't really changed too much, but I think this is where the enchantments show that this deck is meant to be one of my main decks, and cost is not an option in this deck. Concordant Crossroads came in, I think last time I made a revision on the deck, so that when you have a big turn, you don't have to worry about haste on your creatures. One of the best turns is when you can dump creatures in, dump Craterhoof in, and then drop a Concordant Crossroads and just swing your entire board for free because they all have haste, and then you don't have to worry about it. Utopia Sprawl and Wild Growth have been in for a while to help with that early game ramp. One of the biggest adds, and it'll make eyes roll, is Survival of the Fittest. Survival of the Fittest is probably one of those cards in this deck that's going to push it to be an even better deck, because late in the game, when you draw Llanowar Elves or when you draw a creature you don't want, you pitch it, go get the one you do want, and then play it. In a deck like this, it's effectively a Sylvan Tutor that you can just do over and over and over and over again. I think there's, of course, going to be examples where this card wins you the game. You go get the Craterhoof, you go get the whatever, and you play it. But I see Survival of the Fittest doing more of the middle game legwork, where you want a Gargaroth, or you want a Froghemoth, or you want one of these mid-tier creatures. So you pitch a Carolidid, or you pitch a Whisper of the Wilds that you don't need anymore, and you go get that middle of the road beast, because you do have to reveal it. So I would rather not reveal a Craterhoof until I need to. I don't want someone attacking my hand if I can't play it already. And then Sylvan Library came in last time. You do not mind paying the 8 life if you can win the game on that turn. It goes a long way. Elemental Bond, one of the best cards in this deck, just helps with card draw. Same thing with Garruk's Uprising. Not only does it give everything trample, but Elemental Bond is 3 or higher. Garruk's Uprising is 4 or higher, drawing you a card when things come in. Growing Rights of Itlimoc is a Gaia's Cradle on the backside once you can get it to flip, but on the front side, it lets you go get a creature from the top 4, put it in your hand. And then if you have 4 creatures on your end step, it flips into that Gaia's Cradle and just gets even better. Bear Umbra, mainly here to protect Goreclaw. It's a pun. I think it's hilarious that it's a Bear Umbra and we're putting it on Goreclaw most of the time. The Totem Armor just protects Goreclaw, and then whenever you attack, you untap all your lands, so you just keep going. Defense of the Heart, one of my favorite green enchantments, because if you untap with a Defense of the Heart and you get to pick 2 creatures from your deck of your choice, you're going to put a ton of hurt on the table. And Defense of the Heart is just a ton of fun. It's a ton of fun to play with. And then a Natural Growth has been great success in this deck. Whenever I see it, it leads to winning games because having a 6/6 with Trample is even worse when it's a 12/12 with Trample. And when you're doubling your entire board's power and toughness in a big green deck like this, it hurts. And it definitely goes a long way. One of my favorite cards that's been released in the last year. This is one of those green cards. When I looked at it, I said, yep, that goes in Goreclaw. Lands, we are up to 35, I believe, from 33, where it was at before. I was trying my best to start adding a couple more lands in these decks because even though they were running fine with 33 or 34 for me, I know that adding that extra land is never a bad idea. I think we cut a Mosswort Bridge and went up 2 basics, if I remember correctly. I liked Mosswort Bridge, but I was finding most of the time it was just like Fight Rigging that I had in the deck before. It was catching just an odd card most of the time and not catching what you need it to catch. So Beseiju, Castle Garenbrig, Faceless Haven, which turns into a 4/3, which is why it's good. Nykthos, just like Selvala, when you have a ton of creatures on board, this can tap for a ton of mana. Plaza of Heroes, and then 30 Snow Forests. The snow change was made about 6 months ago to play into the north. I think this is what I cut the Cultivate for originally, was into the north, just because we then have 1, 2, 3, 4 different ramp cards that you could play on turn 2. And then we have 1, 2 mana enchantments that you could play on turn 1 or turn 2. And then we added in those artifacts. So we tried to kind of, those mixed with these couple more 3 mana creatures, we're trying to pull those early turns into being more mana setup turns than sitting there doing nothing. So this is a deck that I truly love. I mean, everyone's gonna tell you, oh, I love this deck, or this is my favorite deck. But this is truly my favorite deck. I mean, this is the deck I've had the most fun with. This is everything I love about green, and getting to have a new set come out and see, does this Goreclaw? That's my first question whenever I see a new green mythic or a new green rarest. Does it go in Goreclaw? Does it fit? Can I work it in here? Can I make it work? And a lot of the times, the cast of this deck really changes. It moves around. Creatures have come in and out. I was just telling a friend the other day that I'd love to get Carnage Tyrant back in here. I'd love to get some of those green creatures I love back in here. The one thing I've thought about doing with this deck, Mitch from the Commander Quarters made a deck tech a while back where the concept of the deck was that there was about 60 cards in the deck that were always there, but then he used an extra pile and you would basically randomize those and pick the top 40 and shuffle those in and have a different experience every game depending on what creatures or what spells you got out of this random pile. I would love to cut like 10 or 12 creatures from here and make a big pile of like 30 green creatures, Aggressive Mammoth, Carnage Tyrant, a lot of these fun green creatures, and just pick the top 12 every time I play a deck, shuffle them in, and kind of have fun with the deck every time. I think it could be pretty cool to do that. The other idea I've had is to just make a Nylea Keen-Eyed, just green devotion deck. Just spin it towards those aggressive mammoths and those those cards that just have lots of green pips on them, Gigantosauruses and those kind of things, and just build it more towards green pips, still keeping the big creatures, but spinning it more towards the green pips and Nyx Lotus and just using all those big green creatures for more value. It hasn't been something I've really truly pursued, but I think it's an idea I've always had kind of kicking in the back of my mind. So it's something I may pursue eventually. But let's playtest a hand. We get a pretty bad draw there, so we're going to restart. Seldom with this deck do I get less than 2-land hands. So there we go. We've got our 2-land hand. So we draw. Let's get that forest down. Draw for the turn 2, get the Plaza down. We'll go with 3 visits. I'll go get a Snuffguard Forest in tapped. And we'll shuffle it. All right, so normally turn 4 is where this would be turn 3. You would argue, oh, we'll get Goreclaw down. Most of the time, I would get something like Nylea Keen-Eyed down. This also reduces Goreclaw, but this sets me up better to try to play 2 creatures instead of just 1. Draw for the next turn. We see Sylvan Library. So Goreclaw's 3 now, but that kind of looks like it might be the best option. Get Goreclaw down here. It's kind of an odd hand. There we go. We see another land. Probably go Yorvo in the library. This turns into a creature. We get in a nice big swing with these 2. Get another one down here. Goreclaw's down to 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's probably Bailiff, then Goreclaw. Take a big swing, and then the next turn. I mean, I'm not even looking at the library triggers, but I could probably aggressively go on the library triggers here. But that turn, I would probably awaken the woods for the 1, 2, 3, the 4 that I could, and then that would put me this turn into potentially going off on this Finale Devastation. If not, you would get a little bit deeper into the Sylvan Library and start dumping in creatures. But that just goes to show you a little bit of your plan. Start going wide, attacking while you can. I like to play this deck a little aggressively. Attack while you can. Get your opponents on the back foot, because then they have to worry about who you're going to swing your army of 6/6s at, and just play for fun. That's it, guys. That's my rebrew of Goreclaw. Very excited to keep this deck going, playing it some more, and constantly making the deck better. Let me know what you think of the deck down in the description, or down in the comments. I'm sorry. What would you change? What would you put in the deck? What do you think of it? Please subscribe. I got more of these coming. Like I said, every deck that I have in the main deck, and then my on-deck portion, which is the decks that are in the final stages of testing, got rebrewed. We're going to get videos on all of them. And then after that, I'll probably just do, some deck techs on the other decks. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.